I burned my arm really bad in the engine room. Some diesel exploded, caught me on fire and everything. Looked the skin hanging down, and my shirt was on fire. I started to go up the deck, the ladder. I was going to jump over the side to get out of the fire.
Ask a Vet is dedicated to documenting and preserving veteran stories in their own words on their own terms before their stories are gone forever. Each episode is an unfiltered conversation about who they were before service during war and their adjustment to coming home. If you believe these stories matter, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Your support helps us preserve the voices of those who served. Ask a Vet is proud to partner with Utah Honor Flight, part of the National Honor Flight Network, giving veterans the trip of a lifetime to Washington, D.C. to visit the memorials built in their honor. Every flight is free to veterans and made possible by generous donors. To learn more or support the mission, visit utahhonorflight.org or find your local hub at honorflight.org. And now back to the show.
My name is John Reese Llewellyn. I'm 92 years old. I grew up in Salt Lake and in Murray, Utah. And I went to South High School, graduated in 51. And, of course, the Korean War was going on about that time. And we had to register for the draft when you turned 18 years old. So I didn't do very well in high school. I was interested in hunting and fishing and sports, and didn't apply myself very good, which wasn't good. And so in this podcast, I'd like to comment a little bit about the Navy and education and opportunities, because I found that if you keep your nose clean, showed a little incentive, and did a good job, opportunities are going to open up for you. And I don't care whether it's the military, corporations, or whatever. In America, there's going to be opportunities. So,
okay, so give me a little let's back up a little bit. At the time, did you know much of what was going on how was the Korean War? I feel like that's a war that people don't talk about much or know about because it happened so long ago, and it seemed to skip after World War II to maybe Vietnam that people talked about. What was going on? What was the talk about Korean War from your perspective?
Us guys, 18 years old and that, we knew the Korean War was going, and we knew that we had to register for the draft. And we didn't think too much at that age, like I was more interested in adventure than I was a career of any kind.
Right.
And I was working for some relatives. They had a big sheep and cattle ranch, and so I was working on that ranch. And one of the Gilmores got drafted and into the Army, so I kind of took his place on the ranch. And but he got discharged for high blood pressure out of boot camp. So he came out, and I went back in. But there were, according to the internet, there were 1,789,000 Americans who served in Korea, and I was just one insignificant sailor on a tin can. But our experiences were far from insignificant.
How did you end up? So you didn't get drafted. You signed up.
No, I signed up. I had a cousin, and he lived on a farm in Utah County, and I lived in Salt Lake, and we spent a lot of summers together and everything. And after I graduated, I kind of run around with his group. Well, he was about 8 months older than me, and he joined the Navy, and with another cousin. And when they come home on boot leave, a bunch of us got together, and somebody got some beer, and we had a kind of a party. So me and one of the other guys, his name Weston Winters, we decided that on April the 1st, we'd join the Navy. So we stuck to our guns, and we joined up. We went in the Navy because my cousin had gone in, and he said that's what we ought to do. But when I was going in, he wrote me a letter, and he said, "Strike for machinist mate." Well, I had no idea what a machinist mate was or what he did or anything, but I struck for it. And about the second day in San Diego, we were all given an IQ test. And that IQ test, how we scored, had a lot to do with our future in the Navy. And like I said, I didn't do very good in high school. I just wasn't interested. I get really good grades in the classes I like biology, zoology, and athletics and everything. But I got a straight D- in English. well, a lot of the class were learning about verbs and diametric sentences. I was reading Jack London's short stories in the textbook. So anyway,
did you find, was the test hard, the IQ test in the Navy?
And that I what?
In the Navy, was the IQ test hard?
It was about like high school. I don't remember it was too hard, But I wound up getting to school after boot camp. I was sent to Great Lakes, Illinois, to machinist mate school. Then I found out what a machinist mate does. He works down in the engine room with steam 750 degrees hot, and we made the propellers go around in the forward and after engine rooms, the boiler rooms and stuff. So,
before we jump to that part, take me back to boot camp. Where did you do boot camp, and what was that like?
In San Diego.
What was that like?
It was a cinch as far as I was concerned, the physical part, because I was in good shape working on the ranch, hauling hay and different things like that, and building fences. I had to laugh at a lot of the guys, especially from the South, who had a really tough time, doing the 12-count manual and calisthenics and stuff like that. And so
you didn't even mind it much?
No, I didn't mind it much.
Were they yelling at you a lot, or was it not like that?
Our chief happened to be from Utah, and he liked us Utah guys, and we could get away with stuff where the other guys couldn't.
That's great.
But yeah, and in fact, they asked me to stay and assist a next group coming through, and they'd take one, and he'd be assistant to the chief, and that meant like doing boot camp twice. Well, I wanted to get on to things, and so I kind of told a fib and said I had an aunt who had come from Chicago special to be with me during the leave, and thanks anyway. So it turned out to be the best thing because of the timing, which I'll explain. So up at Great Lakes, Illinois, we either had a Liberty in Chicago or Milwaukee. Chicago, we didn't like that at all. But Milwaukee, those people really treated us landlubber sailors the right way. Had dances every night, and the weekends. And there were 18-year-old kids, and we'd visit the breweries and get free beer and then go to the dances. So we had a good time. So upon graduation, and there was about a couple of hundred of us, and they herded us into an auditorium. And up on the stage was a great big blackboard, and written on it was all the ships in the Navy who needed a machinist mate. I looked down the list, and there was the Stembel DD-644, the ship my cousin was on. One billet is all he needed, just one. Well, I was in the middle of the class, and mentally I was kicking myself in the rear end for not doing better so I could be one of the first to choose. And I sweated it out while people picked carriers, cruisers, and stuff like that. finally it was my turn. I got the Stembel. I went aboard in October of 52. Me and my cousin, we slept right next to each other. We had liberty together. For 3 years, we were together on that ship.
Wow.
And we had some really wild liberties in Japan and Hong Kong and a few places.
What was the Stembel? Tell me about the ship.
There were two classes of destroyers at that time, and we were of the Fletcher class, which is of the smaller of the two. The bigger ones, on the 5-inch mounts, they had 2 barrels that stuck out where we only had one. And on the larger ships, I can't remember what the class it was, but they also had an enclosed passageway going aft and forward so that you weren't exposed to the weather. Not so on a Fletcher, on the Stembel. We had to go on the main deck. And in rough weather, and we were in 2 Typhoons, my first and second cruise, and the water would just come over the O1 deck. I mean, it would be suicide to try to go forward and aft. The sleeping compartments were towards the rear of the ship, and so the head was above our sleeping compartment. Well, it was all protected by bulkheads, but the door opened on the port side, and it had a wheel where you'd crank it open and had it. So what you do is you'd wait until the ship rolled to the starboard. You'd hurry and open that door, step out, close it, put on the hatches, and then climb the ladder to the O1 deck before the water come rushing over on the port side.
Wow.
And so that's the only way you could do it, you know.
How did they get you out to the boat? You just take a ship out there, or where was the boat when you got on it?
Okay. The Stembel had already, the Stembel was first commissioned in 1943, and then it served with dignity into the Pacific. And I'm an avid reader, and I've read an awful lot about the war in Europe and the Pacific and everything. And the one book on the battle for Guam, the Stembel was mentioned in the book. You know, I thought, that's great. They were a picket ship and identified a bunch of Japanese airplanes coming in and stuff. So anyway.
Yeah, how did you get out to the ship? How did you get out to the Stembel?
Okay. It was tied up to the dock when I went aboard, but ordinarily we anchored out. And then in San Diego, they had a water taxi. It would go to the different ships and everything, and off the 5th Street landing.
But it was by San Diego when you got on. It wasn't over.
Pardon?
It was by San Diego. It wasn't over in Korea.
No, it had come back.
Okay.
And the way it worked is you spent 6 months in the States and then 6 months in the Far East. And so I wound up spending 1.5 years on board the Stembel in the Far East. Well, because they got back a short time, I thought, my God, the war's going to be over before I get over there. And I worried about that. Well, finally it came time that we were going over. So from San Diego, we went to San Francisco underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. And I know one time topside there were people up on the thing, and the dirty buggers had spit on us as the ship went underneath. So from San Francisco, we went to Pearl Harbor, stayed there for 3 or 4 days, refueled, and then the Midway Island, and we refueled there. And Midway is where the Goonie birds were, all over the place. And they were big white birds, almost the size of a small turkey, that a big span. We got to walk around on the island. It looked like it was only 3 or 4 feet above the sea level. And there's Goonie birds all over the place. You know, you could walk right up to them. But if one was coming in for a landing, they couldn't swerve. And if you was in their way, they'd crash right into you. So we'd be dodging Goonie birds. And they'd give us 2 cans of beer to drink while we was on there, and it was really hot. Man, I couldn't believe how the alcohol really affected those 2 cans of beer. So anyway, from Midway, we went to Yokosuka, Japan, and we had liberty in Yokosuka more than any other Japanese port, although we went to 3 or 4 others, Sasebo and Hokkaido and a few of those. And then from there, we went to the fleet. And first we was with Task Force 77, and that's where you escort the carriers. And we were the fastest can in our division of 4, and so we were the closest to the carrier all the time when they launched and landed. And the carrier would be here, and we'd be just off the fantail on the starboard side. So at that time, I was topside, and I had a ring, first class look at everything that went on. Well, this one day, there was 5 planes went over on a mission in Korea. And of course, they'd bomb or strafe us up, but they also got shot at too. Well, they come back, and I noticed the 4 of them landed safely and everything, but the 5th one just kept circling and circling. And I knew something was wrong. And each time it circled, it would get lower and lower. Finally, it come in to land. It hit the deck, and then it bounced and dropped right into a whole bunch of other planes that were stalled up at the bottom. They burst into flame, knocked over one plane off, and another was hanging up. But the damage control, they were right on the ball and waiting, and they shot foam onto the ship and put the fire out in about 1 or 2 minutes.
Wow.
So a few days later, we had liberty in Yokosuka, and the carrier also did. And I found one of the guys. I could tell that they worked on from their insignias. I asked how the pilot made out, and he said he made out okay, that he was safe and everything. So from there, we went into Task Force 94, which is where we patrolled the coast of North Korea. And we stood 4 on and 4 off watches. And at night, you couldn't have any lights at all, not a cigarette or anything. And we got, I guess, combat pay. We got extra pay. And the danger was mines and shore batteries, but we never had any problems in that regard. Although one tin can 2 or 3 months earlier had hit a mine, and it didn't sink. But those old salts, the chief said, if we get hit by a mine or it hit really good, we're only going to have 45 seconds to get off the ship. And down in the engine room, there was the only way out on port and starboard was a hatch about the size of a manhole to climb up that ladder. Well, I didn't mind it so bad, and part of my job at that time was to check the bearings in the shaft that went back to the propeller on the starboard side. And so this one night, I had been back there, and I was on the one deck, and I was starting to work, and it was really dark. There was no moon, it's just the stars and everything. But I could look out onto the land, because we was only, half a mile off, and I could see the flashes of artillery going on. And I stood there mesmerized, kind of, I guess, for 10 or 15 minutes, watching those flashes and everything. Well, when we joined the Navy at Fort Douglas in Salt Lake, they had us out on the grinder, and they had the guys that were going to the Navy standing here, and over here, the guys that were going in the Marines. Well, there was only 2 going in the Marines, and there was about 10 of us. And the chief said, "Any of you guys like to go into the Marines? We can just do the paperwork and right now." And I told my buddy, let's go in the Marines. And they were watching. He says, "I ain't going in there." And I said, "Come on, let's go." And he says, I'm not getting in no foxhole and stuff. My heart started beating. I was going to go by myself. And then I thought, no, I'd be a banding. We wanted to go to boot camp together. And as it turned out, it was probably the right thing. But, he didn't want to go into the Marines but they made a corpsman out of him. The first two years he was in the Balboa Hospital, and when we'd come into port, we'd get together and we'd go out to El Cajon. We never hung around all those beer joints in San Diego. We went out in the suburbs. The second 2 years, they put him with the Marines at Camp Pendleton. So it was kind of ironic. But a few days after that, the word spread through the ship that the brass was unhappy with shooting at the railroad tracks. There was a railroad track that come along in North Korea that furnished supplies to the Chinese and that, and would shoot at the railroad tracks, dismantle it. Well, they weren't happy with the way it was going, and so they were going to send a shore party over to be for the observers, and the Stembel was to furnish the shore party. I went and volunteered. The words, I don't know how the word spreads on those ships. There's only a little over 250 of us and everything, and everybody knew everybody else. My cousin found out that I had joined or volunteered. So he pinned me on the 01 deck. Give me hell, he says, you dumbass. What are you signing up for? You're behind the lines and stuff. And I told him about watching the flashes of the artillery. And I thought, watching that, if I'd have joined the Marines, maybe I'd have been there instead of on that ship. A dry bunk to sleep in every night and three meals a day. I felt like a coward. It really was emotional for me. I found out a couple of days later my cousin had joined, volunteered to go. So it was my turn to corner him. And I said, you call me a dumbass, you're a dumbass too, And he says, well, I told your dad I was going to watch over you, which was bull crap and everything. But mentally, we were prepared to go, but the brass eventually called it off, and we never went. So, but there was, besides Korea, well, after we did our hitch up in Task Force 94, we had Liberty in Yokosuka, and so this would have been in July in 1953, and there was a bunch of us in the Yokosuka bar, which was the largest bar in Yokosuka. And there was about 20 or 30 other guys there, a big bar. And they come over the loudspeaker that the war was over. And they signed the armistice. And the whole place just went silent. And I was surprised. There was no whistling, no cheering or anything like that. Everything was silent. Everybody had their own thoughts. After about 2 minutes, we just went to bullshitting and drinking beer just like nothing had happened.
Wow.
So part of our tour was to go on the Formosa Patrol, which was patrolling the straits between mainland China and Formosa. And just full of refugees trying to get there. And our only two liberty ports was Hong Kong and then Subic Bay in the town of Olongapo. And we called Olongapo the armpit of the world because all it was bars and brothels and drunken sailors. And the Pulse Shore Patrol there was really an experience. And we'd anchor out, and that was our whole division, all 4 tin cans. And so a lot of them going on Liberty, and the only way we could get was on the whale boat. And the whale boat could only take 8 or 10 guys at a time. And the dock was way high, about 15, 20 feet above the water, an old wooden one. And we had midnight curfews all the time. Well, I had to pull shore patrol after I made third-class petty officer. And the curfew at 12 o'clock on that dock, drunken sailors from 4 tin cans And of course, the fights started. And the fights were so bad and everything. I mean, you just let them fight it out. Guys getting knocked off in the water and stuff like that. So that was kind of fun. The only two places in Asia, Japan and the Philippines, where we were safe to drink water or the food was in Hong Kong at the British restaurants. And then we had one Liberty in Manila, and there was a really nice restaurant where we could have a dinner there. And so I was getting ready to go on the shore patrol the second or third time in Subic Bay, and I was all dressed, and of course we was anchored out and in uniform and everything, and the captain come aboard ship and said, all liberties are canceled and everything. We're getting underway in half hour. And so I hurried down and got back into my dungarees and got back down. By that time, we were going. At that time, I was the throttleman to make the propeller go around, which was a pretty important job in the engine room. And the rumor was that we were at war with China. And so we were steaming towards Formosa at flank speed all night long, thinking that we were at war. But actually what it was when we got there is a bunch of communist Chinese and bumboats tried to invade one of the little small islands, Quemoy, next to Formosa. And they just shot the shit out of those sampans. That's all the only Navy the communists had at that time. And by the time we got there, it was just a bunch of debris. I'd like to tell another story about opportunity and education and stuff. We went into a port in Formosa, and we went through a little channel, narrow channel, and on both sides of the big howitzers guarding it. And inside there was several ships. There were mostly commercial ships. And there was even a Russian ship, this big hammer and sickle painted on the smokestack. Well, there wasn't anything there, but there must have been 1,000 bumboats of different sizes. We call them bumboats. And they just surrounded the ship. And there were so many of them that you could have got off and walked about 200 feet off. They were that thick. And of course, they were peddling all their wells, the stuff they had. Mostly really bad liquor and prostitutes. And some of those crazy guys would slip off the fantail, which is only about 6 or 7 feet above the surface of the water, and get in there. But the venereal disease over there was rampant. It was terrible. It was nuts to mess around. Well, very few guys ever went on liberty because there was nothing there. No bars, no brothels, no nothing else. But me and a couple of my buddies who happened to be yeomen, we decided we're going to go over so we can say we'd set foot on Formosa. So we climbed up, and of course there's refugees all the way. Poor, hungry, in tatters and stuff. I mean, it was just pathetic amount of them. We climbed up, and the only building that we saw was an old ramshackle wooden general store, not very big, and dirt roads, and there's people milling around and everything. And we were accosted by a British ensign, a young feller, and he was all decked out in his dress white uniforms and everything. And he wanted to buy us Yanks an orangeade. Well, we didn't want to fraternize with an officer, especially a limey officer. But he was so insistent that we said, okay. Well, he was a good-looking guy and could have passed for an American. A lot of the British, you could tell they were British by looking at him. Well, he got the orangeade, and we sat at a rickety old table with some benches on the outside. Right away, he launched into a diatribe about how superior the British form of government was compared to the American government, and told us how much better off we'd have been if we'd have stayed a colony. Well, I was humiliated. The three of us, dumb young sailors, didn't know enough about our own country to debate him. And I swore to myself, I'll never get caught in a position like that again. When I got back on the ship, I signed up for correspondence courses for English, history, and political science. And I made the goal I was going to go to the University of Utah when I got out. And I hated that damn arrogant ensign. But then it dawned on me, I really owed him a vote of thanks. He motivated me to better myself and to go to the University of Utah. So anyway, that was an experience. Getting back into the ship and opportunities. I was the throttleman on the big board with all dials and valves and stuff like that, and the bridge would ring down how many revolutions they wanted. I'd answer, and then I'd make sure that we did that. So during the general quarters, the engineering officer was down there, and the chief of the watch, and then me, when we were under the same blower. And those engine rooms were hot. Get 110, 115 degrees, and you'd have to stand under that blower. Well, as a result, I got to know the engineering officer a little bit, and we'd chat. And he was a young academy graduate. And when he first come aboard, he was all regulation. We're going to stand personnel inspections on the fantail, and water come gushing over and our feet and everything. He finally wised up and found out, you just don't have regulations on a tin can like you do on the cruisers and carriers and stuff. So he actually turned out to be a pretty good guy. And he says, John, how do you like the Navy? And I says, I like it fine, all right, but if I had to do it again, I wouldn't come in as an enlisted man. And he looked me over and he says, you know what? He says, I can arrange for you to take a test. And if you pass the test, we'll not only educate you, and you knew I wanted to go to the University of Utah, but we'll turn you into an officer and a gentleman. God, here was an opportunity. I mean, it was a huge opportunity for that. And I debated. I'd done so poorly in high school, and my worst fear was to take the test and fail. And I didn't know whether my correspondence courses had prepared me or not. Well, I only had a year left to go, and I was engaged to a cute little blue-eyed blonde, and I weighed the two and everything. And if I passed the test, I'd have to do 6 more years. But this way, only a year, and I still got my education, so I turned it down. But I've often thought, I don't know, hundreds of times, how my life would have changed had I taken care of that opportunity. I guess what I'm driving at is it don't matter whether it's the military or what, and I think I said it before, keep your nose clean, show a little incentive, and learn all you can, and the opportunities will present itself. Lee Iacocca wrote a book. Lee was the one who saved General Motors from bankruptcy. And out of the book, I got this one thing when I read it. And he says, learn all you can about what it is you want to do and then make something happen. Some of the best advice I've ever had, which I used after I got out of the Navy.
Yeah, what did you do after you got out?
Well, I had one more opportunity.
Yeah.
They sent me to a shallow water diving school just a day, and it was rooms that were flooded and everything, 2 or 3 rooms, and they'd throw bricks down, and they would go down and gather up those bricks. Well, the guys that went before me, there was about 5 or 6 bricks. They only found 1 or 2 and come up. Well, I went down, and my God, breathing underwater, I really liked that. That was really great. And I stayed down long enough searching all those rooms till I got all of the bricks. And the chief in charge was getting worried because I was down so long. Anyway, I got up and I said, Chief, is there another school, a more comprehensive school that I could go to water diving? He says, no, but there is a deep sea diving school. And if you get it, you'll have to ship over and do another 4 years. Well, weighing that cute little blue-eyed blonde and 4 more years in the Navy, I turned that down. But it's another opportunity. And they just kept cropping up. So,
what was the living conditions? What were the sleeping arrangements on the ship? Just give me a little bit of that.
Like sardines. And all the engineers, we had our own compartment. And they were the guys in the boiler rooms and the engine room and some electricians and everything. There's 4 bunks high. And when I first come aboard, the only bunk that was available was on the bulkhead. Right next to it. It was the 3rd one high. And there's only a 1/4 inch of steel between you and the ocean. And we'd be out to sea and that side would throb, especially the water. So the first time there was another bunk available, it was a bottom bunk in the middle of there, and it had to be right next to my cousins. And we just slept together, right together. So.
What was the food like on the boat? Tell me about that.
The first time I went aboard, the cooks were good. And when I first come aboard, they'd have mess cooks from each division. You'd have to do that for 3 months or so. So I got picked to be a mess cook, except they put me in the potato locker in the galley, and they had a machine that peeled all the potatoes. And only took about an hour. And I had open gangway. I could, if we happened to be in port and everything. And the cooks there were really good. And I ate the cooks and ate the best. And then, but then after that, we got new cooks and they weren't all that great. In rough water, it seems like we'd have greasy pork chops, stuffed pork chops, or else shit on the shingle, what that was. And the mess hall also acted as a sleeping compartment, and so they put up tables and everything. We just had a little narrow thing, and sat on the bunks. Well, in the rough water, there wasn't many guys eating because so many of them were so seasick. But you had to hold on to your tray because the ship was going back and forth, up and down. It goes sliding down. This one time, one of the guys' food went into the aisle there. The guys stepped in and slipped, fell on his butt. It was just a riot, My cousin and I, neither one of us got seasick, not once, no matter how rough it was. And boy, it got rough and some of that.
You said you were in 2 typhoons?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
The first time over, well, it got really, really rough and the water would go over, but I had to check the bearings in the thing, and so I had to go down in the after engine room. It was on the port side, and it was just a hatch to go down. And the waves had knocked loose a bunch of stuff that was on the wall and a handy billy pump and on the quarterdeck. And that pump was going back and forth and stuff. And there was a second-class gunner's mate, and he wasn't a very big guy, and he was trying to save this handy billy pump, and it probably weighed 100 pounds, sliding around. And he had a heck of a time because the ship rolling in the water and everything. All of a sudden, I had the hatch open to go down and into that after engine room. We took a great big pull to the starboard, and without exaggerating, the wave come over the 01 deck, and that second-class gunner's mate run up the side of the bulkhead and grabbed a hold of something. I don't know what it was, and the water came over, and I couldn't see him. I thought that it washed him off. And I jumped up on the handrail and was standing up above it. The water was about 3 or 4 feet deep and was just swirling going down into the after fire room. Those guys were yelling, "Shut the blankety blank hatch." Well, once the ship righted and everything, the water, there he was, just like a fly, still holding on to that bulkhead. Well, he dropped back down and took off forward, and the heck with the handy billy hand after that. So, and then on the second cruise, as soon as the waves started to subside, there would be this great big swells. And I mean, they were giant swells. And the ship would go up and it'd hit the top of the swell, and part of the front end would come out of the water and would drop, and it'd smack. And then the propellers would come out of the water partly. You'd go down, and it's just like a canyon, and then you'd work your way back up there, and then the ship is shaking and that. And once again, the bow would come out slap. Well, that would go on for several hours until the water finally calmed down.
Wow.
And like I said, we had to pull shore patrol once you made a third-class petty officer. All the ships had to donate guys. And there was a yeoman that come aboard, and his first 4 years was on land. He shipped over so he could get sea duty, and he wanted to be on a tin can. Well, he come aboard here. The poor bugger got seasick. I can remember seeing him laying there on that 01 deck, and his dungarees were white from the salt spray and everything. And we'd just laugh, and everything. But he was gung-ho. He liked to go on shore patrol, so he'd take 2 or 3 of my shore patrols. I was more than happy to give them to him.
He just wanted off the boat.
Yeah. Well, I when you go over, especially in the Philippines, it was always dealing with drunks all the time, and I didn't care that kind of a law enforcement thing.
The gun on the boat, what was that like when that was going off? And
The gun?
Yeah.
Well, my first general quarters station was in the magazine at the very bottom of the ship, as far forward as you could get, three decks down. And claustrophobia, I didn't like it at all. Well, finally they found somebody else, and I was on the damage control on the quarter deck, so I got to see pretty much what was going on. Once they made me throttleman, that became my general quarters station in the special sea detail, and I was always below decks, never got to see anything. But, they just shoot, the railroad tracks in Korea, and then we would go to, I think it was San Clemente Island, a little island out of San Diego, and we'd practice shooting there. And we'd anchored out, and this one night, then they had a night light on the fantail, and the damn squid, thousands of them were attracted by this light, and then some small sharks would come and feed off them. But it sucked all of these squids into the main condenser, which condensed the water in the forward engine room. Well, I was a third-class petty officer then, and all of the seamen and the seamen recruits and everything, we shut everything down, opened the hatches, and they had to get in that thing. We got 3 great big garbage cans full of shrimp about the size of your hand, orange shrimp, out of there.
Wow.
So, and then we practiced shooting at sleeves with the ACAC guns on the 01 deck. And twice we practiced, we'd do anti-submarine, and we practiced shooting off the depth charges, a big pattern of them. And I'd be down in the forward engine room when they went off. It was just like being in a submarine. You'd hear the click, and then the whoosh, and the whole the back end of the ship would raise 3 or 4 feet from the concussions.
Wow.
And another time, we shot the torpedoes off the O1 deck and the practicing. So we got a little bit of everything at one time or another.
Did you make good friendships on the boat?
A lot of good friendships. Yeah. And we'd go over. One night in Yokosuka, a lot of us guys that hung out together in the engineering, we had our bar to go to, and every ship had their specific bar or something like that. And I can't remember how it started, but my cousin smacked me in the jaw, and I said, "What in the hell did you do that for?" And the other guys, we'd all been drinking, The other guy started pounding on him, and so he was by himself, so I helped him, and we started. Anyway, we had nobody really got hurt, and I remember we got back to the ship and was tied up to the dock, and we happened to be in we had a problem with a turbine. It was in a month. Was tied up there in a dry dock, and we had to go to the bathroom on the side of the on the dock, and it was really embarrassing because they had Japanese women that would clean the head, and you'd be sitting there doing your duty, and some Japanese gal sweeping around your feet and everything. But the morality in Asia was much different than it was in America, and we had I guess kind of a wild ship. We had some pretty wild liberties at a time or two. The city of Los Angeles, a heavy cruiser, was in Yokosuka, and they had about 3 times as many guys on that ship. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but they had more guys restricted to the ship with VD than we did on the tin can. And the only doctor we had was a second-class pharmacist mate, and he was a drinking buddies of a lot of guys, and so he'd sneak him penicillin tablets and stuff. I burned my arm really bad in the engine room. Some diesel exploded, and it caught me on fire and everything. Looked the skin hanging down, and my shirt was on fire. I started to go up the deck, the ladder. I was going to jump over the side to get out of the fire. I couldn't get down in the bilges. But by the time I got halfway up, I got the fire out, and I got back down. I looked at my hand. Never felt any pain, the skin hanging out. And so the Dickie Doc shot me with morphine, and I slept for almost 2 days. And I guess they radioed the doctor on one of the other ships on how to treat me. And anyway, while I was asleep, I'd made second-class petty officer, which is as high as I could go. And they made me a master at arms on the ship, and so I'd hang around the sick bay while it was going on, while the guys went there, and then I'd stand by the mess hall in case there was any problems. Anyway, there was this black guy that had gonorrhea, and they couldn't cure it with the penicillin. And I was watching the Dickie Doc, and down by his groin, I probably maybe shouldn't be telling some of these stories to the general public, but he had a big blister about the size of a $50 on his groin, and the Dickie Doc popped it and boiled. Crabs boiled out.
Oh, jeez.
Well, President Truman had integrated the military back then for the blacks and stuff, but I never prejudiced. Some of my friends were Mexicans, and there was a few blacks on there. But they give this guy sulfa, and he was in the head and this weight one night, and he passed out on the deck. And there was 2 guys, I knew them quite well from Tennessee, and And anyway, one grabbed his feet and the other grabbed his arms. And they said, "Come on, Llewellyn, help us." I said, "What are you going to do?" He says, "We're going to throw him over the side. We'll never get a better chance than that." Well, we were out to sea, And I said, "Oh, no, that ain't going to happen. Not on my watch." I saved his butt. He never knew it, but they were serious. They were going to throw him over the side.
Wow.
But all in all, it wasn't that bad. There was some scary times.
What was the scariest thing?
The scariest was in those typhoons and the water going back and forth and everything.
Is the ship just creaking at that point when it's bending? And
it had an expansion joint halfway, and I remember walking over that thinking, I hope you hold, during that wet weather and thing. So
when that's going on, do you know are they keeping you informed about what's happening in the war, or is that all just...
No, your whole world was that ship and the scuttlebutt that was going on back and forth. And there was one thing, especially in the South China Sea, and way on the way, on Sundays and nice weather, the radio men would pick up a radio station and then pipe it through the ship. And the station they got to the most was KSL, Salt Lake City, Utah. And there was only two of us from Utah. We thought that was great.
Wow.
And of course, those days, they just played music. And it was mostly like, Frank Sinatra, Perry Como, and people like that. And then there was the country guys that played the hillbilly music, we called it, and everything. But yeah, we had three guys that we'd lost aboard ship while I was aboard. One was in the forward engine room, and he crawled behind the electric panel to sneak and to go to sleep. And in his sleep, he reached up and touched something, got electrocuted. And the guys had to take a broom and prise his arm off. The second one was tied up anchored out in San Francisco in the bay. And they're showing a movie on the quarterdeck. And one of the guys from the engine room was sitting on the lifeline, the little wires, and it broke, and he tumbled over backwards into the water, and he went straight down. And some of the guys grabbed gang hooks on ropes and throwing them over. Luckily, they snagged him, but of course, he was dead by then, and they brought his body up. The third, we was on our way overseas, somewhere around between Pearl Harbor and Midway, and there's a guy in the CID, and they had to be pretty sharp to work there, and a lot of dials and stuff. I don't know what went through his head and everything, but he took a hammer and he smashed up all the dials, and then he went and jumped over the side, just committed suicide. And there was a boot that had been just aboard the ship. He watched him dive over, didn't say a word, and thought it must be part of the
drill or something
going on.
Huh.
So a couple hours later, they were looking for him, and they were looking all through the ship, and everything. Finally, the guy says, "Oh, I saw him. He jumped over the side." Of course, going back to get him, that wasn't no use.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was that sobering for everyone on the ship when someone would die, or was it just kind of just part of the job?
Yeah,
or what?
It was just got part of the job, And then sadly, seeing all of these people, I mean, even in Japan, the people would be lined up, 15 or 20 or 30 of them, just to get our garbage. In Hong Kong, there was a lady there, the name was Susie something. She had the shiniest mouth in town, all kinds of gold and everything. She had 5 or 6 young teenage girls, and they would paint the ship on the outside just for the garbage. And I noticed that the girls had blemishes on their face, and most Orientals had really clean, smooth faces. And I figured it was from eating this rich garbage of the Americans. There's another time we were anchored out by one of the little islands on Formosa, and I could, looking at the island, I see this little speck, and it was a couple of guys in a little bumboat, not much bigger than a rowboat, and it kept getting bigger and bigger. It was coming out to the ship. Well, they finally got to us, and they come up close to the ship, and the boatswain's mates grabbed a fire hose and would squirt at them to keep them away from the ship for fear of sabotage. Well, you could see that they weren't saboteurs. They were just hungry Chinese. And we hoot and hollered at the guys with the hose, let them alone, let them alone. Well, somebody called the executive officer. He came back, and he could see there was nothing wrong with them. So they let him come up next to the ship, and we brought 2 great big garbage cans full of garbage, and they dumped it over into that boat. Some of it would fall on their head and shoulders. They just big smiles on their face, and right away they start separating the different food at the bottom. I mean,
wow!
And that you didn't get immune to it, but you got used to all of that poverty and the refugees.
Wow! So how did it end? How did when you came home? What happened?
What happened?
Yeah, when you came home, how did it end? Your service?
The war ended on the second one, and we come back, the 4 of us, the tin cans, and we docked at the 5th Street landing in San Diego. And gosh, there was people there, a band playing and all that stuff, and the married guys, their girlfriends, all waiting and stuff like that. And I remember Reese and I, we got off the ship and walked and looked at all those people and everything. But I got discharged out of Treasure Island in San Francisco, and I got out a month early so I could make the spring quarter at the University of Utah. When I went home on leave, I made all the arrangements, passed the test. I was enrolled, ready to go. And the day after I left, they were giving the first class test. And the old salts said, "You'll be sorry," they wanted me to stay aboard and take that test, but I knew I wasn't going to be coming back.
Yeah.
But we had to sign up for 8 years, 4 active duty and 4 in the reserves.
Right.
And when Vietnam came, I kind of sweated it out, wondering if I'd get called, but I never did.
What were you going to study at the University of Utah when you got out?
Well, my grandfather was a MD. He was one of the original doctors that started up the Salt Lake Clinic. He named one of his sons after him, hoping he'd follow in his footsteps. He didn't. So I was the first grandson. I was named after him, hoping I'd do it. Well, I went up there, and I had good intentions. I thought, but if I'm smart enough, maybe I'll do it. But then I got that job as a deputy sheriff, and I fell in love with law enforcement. So I went to school for 3 years and worked as a deputy sheriff on the afternoon shift. And then finally I knew I wasn't going to I dropped out after the 3rd year and went steady because it's pretty rough taking 14 hours and then working 8 hours and stuff.
Yeah.
At that time it was politics when I first went there. And
the politics at the University of Utah, that's what you were studying?
No, at the sheriff's office.
Oh, you're saying it was political at the sheriff's office?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the sheriff was elected.
Okay.
And they took so much out of each one of our paycheck, they called it the flower fund. And that helped
keep the sheriff so you had a job.
Office, yeah. And they had the Jefferson Jackson days. He had a big, they'd auction off a car and had a big dance and stuff. And Archie Evans, the captain in charge of that, there were so many deputies that their whole job was keeping the sheriff reelected, Anyway, give me a book of the tickets. My dad bought some, and I bought 2 or 3. But even at $1, a lot of the guys were vets that I knew, and they didn't want to even spend $1. Well, I was dispatching from the jail on the afternoon shift. The sheriff was there, and 2 or 3 other people, and I gave the book back to Aki Evans, and I said, "I'm sorry, Aki, that's all I could sell." He looked at it, and there was about 4 more tickets left, 4 or 5. And he says, so the sheriff could hear, "You've still got time, Llewellyn. You can sell those." And he tossed me the ticket. Well, I saw that. Thankfully, I had enough money to buy the tickets. Well, I was kind of discouraged afterward, and my wife and I, we went to a beer joint that we knew and had a beer, and when I come home, we was living in a basement apartment. There was a note in the screen door. It was from my dad, and I looked at it, and it said, "You won the car." And during the drawing, I'd won the damn car, a 1958 Oldsmobile four-door.
That's a great story.
I sold the car back to Glenn Carr and used the money as a down payment, and we got a house out in Holiday. Got to put a down payment for a house.
Oh, that's great. That's a great story.
During the dance with and they say, "You're the guy that won the car. How did that work?" And I said, "Believe me, there was no fancy stuff. I won it fair and square."
So how many years were you a deputy then? Or
23 years.
Wow.
Yeah. I spent half of it as a detective. I had my back operated on after 3 years, and I was just getting ready to go on a motorcycle, and that's where all my buddies were in traffic. And I was really disappointed. I had to go in and have a back operation. I was a month recovering from that, and the sheriff said, he says, I can't let you go out on the road with your back. And I said, oh, shit. So I hunted around, and I got a job with Glens Falls Insurance Company as an insurance adjuster. And I worked there for 2 years. I guess I did a good job. They sent me down to San Francisco and wined and dined me. We're going to give me my own office in Spokane, Washington, moved me up there. Well, I didn't want to go to Spokane. I didn't want to move, from family. And so they had to let me go. By that time, the sheriff's office was under the merit system. So you had protection as a deputy. And I went ahead and took the test and everything and passed it all. And of course, I still knew a lot of the guys. And I got hired back on, and the sheriff said, "John, I can't give you any special treatment because of your back." And I said, "Sheriff, I don't want any special treatment. Just treat me like that." Well, at that time, they're starting to specialize, and I was selected to be in the juvenile division. And a lot of the guys tried to play it tough, dirty Harry type, then the detective office. But rather than use my muscle, I used my head. And I made friends with a lot of the wild kids up on the avenues, and we had a whole bunch of, anyway, I wound up solving about 30 house burglaries, got 3 or 4 boxes of loot, and the captain was I didn't care for him, had pictures in the paper and all that stuff. Well, when they formed the detective division, and there was a lot of politics, the sheriff was getting old and everything, and the guys were jockeying around wanting to run for sheriff. There's a lot of competition. So I got transferred over into the detective division, and they made me and one other guy in charge of all the sex crimes. And like a lot of things, I commit myself, I dive into it, and I just reading everything I could. There was nobody I could call upon, and so I talked to psychiatrists and psychologists and everything. Well, I did really well, and made a lot of arrests, spent a lot of time in court. I taught at the police academy, interview and interrogation and sex crimes. And I even gave sex crime seminars around the state. And I was one of the most popular guys in the county attorney's office because I had all these juicy sex crimes going down there. We had every sex crime there was on the book that they'd have in New York or Chicago, just not as many of it. And I treated a lot of them as being sick, and I treated them from the more psychologically, and I could get a lot of confessions because I was familiar with their problems and stuff. So
wow,
I had a good time. But the politics, and once I made lieutenant, they transferred me out, and some of the older guys tried to use me as politics that were going to run for sheriff. I just refused. I just didn't want to get involved.
Yeah.
And doing a good job, making arrests, clearing cases and stuff, you needed more than that. You needed to make yourself known to the authority and let him believe that promoting you helped keep him going. I mean, there was guys that never wrote a ticket, never solved a case, never testified in court, who became captains because they convinced the sheriff that they could help getting elected. Sycophants.
Yeah.
I did not like sycophants. And I was kind of a maverick. And as a result, when they did the captain's test, I was number 3 on the list. And the 2 top ones were sycophants. Well, they got promoted right away. I stayed number 1 on the captain's promotion list for 2 years, and he kept passing over me because I would not kiss his butt. No, I could
Good for you.
I looked in the mirror, and everything I got on my own. It wasn't from kissing somebody's rear end. So
good for you. That's good.
I've had a good life.
How many grandkids you got? How many kids you got?
Oh, boy, a whole bunch of them.
How many kids did you have?
Well, my first wife and I, she had an operation. She couldn't have children. We adopted a little boy and a girl.
Okay.
I fell in love with them. And at that time, there was a bunch of us that drank beer. And we'd work hard and would meet for coffee and smoke 2 packs of cigarettes. Well, I decided that I ought to change my way of living because of these kids and start to get active in the church. And anyway, we got a divorce. I married a little gal. She had 2 prior kids, and then we had 5 biologically.
Wow.
So they're all growing up now.
Here,
I've got a whole batch of great grandkids.
That's great.
Yeah. So.
Wow, you've lived an interesting life, John.
Yeah. Well, I'm only telling you part of it. I'm not telling you it all. But yeah, it has.
What's your take on your time in the Navy then, if you look back on it now?
I got more out of the Navy than the Navy got out of me. I think it would be great for a lot of our young men to do a 3 or 4 hitch in one of the militaries. It'll really help you. I don't think we'd have the gangs problems that we had and everything. Another thing, working nothing but sex crimes. What was against the law then and was considered a freakish and perverted now is totally accepted. I'm still living, my morals are still back in the 1950s. I was no prude, but they're just a line that I have to draw.
Yeah.
And as far as an education is concerned, back then, a college education was a high priority. But I'm finding now young people, some of my own grandkids and that, they're not as interested in college education anymore, because instead of learning how to think for yourself and make wise decisions, too many kids are being indoctrinated. And I think that's a sad situation too.
Yeah.
So
times have changed a lot, haven't they?
Yeah. But the Navy was great for me. I didn't know it at the time, but it did a heck of a lot to mature me and help me later on in life.
So when you came, unlike Vietnam, where those guys came back, didn't tell anybody they went, you guys didn't, that wasn't the case for you guys. You were...
No. In fact, when I come home, I caught a bus, had my sea bag, and got off at the bus depot and had to get a taxi to go home. Nobody was there to say welcome home or anything. You just fit right in, and of course I had everything all planned out, the University of Utah and this little blue-eyed blonde. We later got divorced, but at the time,
And you're in great shape for how old you are, my friend.
Yeah, I got several of my kids. It's my one daughter here that comes and get me. And after this trip to D.C., I have a son that's into paragliding. I'm going to go paragliding. I'm going to sit around on my duff. I'm going to get as much out of life as I can while I can.
That's great. That's great.
So
thanks for your service, man, and thanks for sharing.
Well, the point I want to make is, especially with young people and the fathers that might be listening to this, there's still opportunities. And of all my priorities, being an American is number one. You see all of the heartache and the war, refugees and stuff, makes you, with all of our weaknesses and mistakes that we've made, still the best country in the world. Second priority is being a father. The third is a veteran. That's a fraternity that is exclusive. And I'm looking forward to meeting all those younger guys in their 80s that were in Vietnam.
On your honor flight.
Yeah, on the honor flight.
Yeah. Well, thank you, sir.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I don't know.
Appreciate it. That was fantastic.
Whether it was worthwhile.
Oh, my gosh. That was fantastic.